Let us pray. Heavenly Father, as we look to the storms that are around us, we call on you to wake up. We call on you to speak up and to calm those storms. We look to you at this time and always. Amen.
Amen.
Today's gospel lesson, the story of Jesus and the disciples as they're out on the sea in a storm, is more than just a miraculous event. It is a story that gives us insight into who we are as human beings, into who we are called to be as disciples of Jesus, into who Jesus is, who he truly is, and into the character of God. So it's more than just a wonderful small story that we can fly by. There's depth here that if you take a look at it and seek it out. Now, in this story, Jesus is still fairly new in working with his disciples. He has been teaching and preaching. He has been healing. He has been gathering people together. But they don't really yet know him. They don't really know who he is yet. But they know there's something very, very different about him. Well, that day, on a very busy day, Jesus tells them to go to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. And so they get in their boats. Now, these are seasoned fishermen. These are sailors. These are people who know the waters. They could probably see the storm clouds on the distance, and they might have been wondering, is this such a smart idea? But they went ahead and did it, and they get in there. Maybe they didn't see it. Maybe it's one of those rush windstorms that come in off of the Sea of Galilee that you don't see. But either way, they're seasoned fishermen. And when they go out there, as the storm gathers around them and the waves begin to crash in on the boat and fill the boat, so much so that they can't just bail the water out, they begin to panic. They're afraid. This fear is a natural response, and even though they're seasoned sailors, they're wondering, are we going to live through this? And so that natural gut instinct is to feel the fear, to act in panic or terror, and to reach out for something. And they look, and there they see Jesus. But what's Jesus doing? He's asleep. Now, maybe it was just a really long day and he was just that tired, but they're looking out there and they're seeing that Jesus is asleep. And so their reaction is to go over to him and wake him up. Now, they don't know who Jesus is just yet. They don't know fully who he is, but maybe they've seen enough in him that he's cast out these demons, that he's healed all these people. Maybe they've seen enough in him to know that maybe he could do something. And so they call on him. They wake him up from his sleep. Now, the first thing that Jesus does is to get up. He does wake up, and he sees the storm about him, and he rebukes the storm itself. And he says to the storm, "Peace, be still." And the wind stops, and the waves level out, and there's peace. Jesus speaks to the storm. The next thing he does is he tells the disciples, "Why were you worried? Don't you have faith?" Now, as I read that, it reminds me of those wonderful teachers that I've had in my life who just expected us students to know these things that, we came there to learn. How would these disciples know that you can speak to the storms and tell it to stop? They haven't seen that before. So I don't think Jesus is chastising them for their lack of faith. I think Jesus is awakening them to the reality that something different is going on here. But give Jesus credit first. His first action is to calm the storm. In our life and in our world, we experience storms. They come in many forms. Some are physical storms, that wind that blows through, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, these forces of nature that are genuinely beyond our control and outside of our power. We experience those storms. We experience those storms in the world as the cultural forces around us are in upheaval. And it's more than any one of us can do anything about. We experience those storms. And the natural response is fear. The natural reaction is to pull in. And in those moments, we have choices of what we can do. What's amazing about these disciples is that in that moment, they speak up. They cry out. And Jesus is with them. And so as they cry out to Jesus, they ask him to wake up. And it reminds me of all those beautiful stories and psalms and prayers throughout the Bible when the people of God are experiencing these storms of life, the conflicts, the violence, the wars of the world, and they cry out to God and they say, "Wake up, Lord, where are you? I don't see you." It is very appropriate. It is very good in those moments to call out to God and say, "Wake up. Can't you see what's going on?" We stand on good ground. We stand on solid ground when we do that. And it's not a lack of faith, it's an expression of faith when we turn to God, because in truth, there are storms that are bigger than any one of us. In truth, if we are humbled by life itself in whatever form that we do, we have to look to God. And if we can't see God, if we can't hear God, if we think God's asleep, it's okay. Say, "God, please, please wake up." We can do that. There's no shame in doing that. And we can learn from these disciples that we can wake up Jesus. The thing that we see in Jesus is that he does wake up. He does respond. He does take action. And so as we look to Jesus, as we call to God in our lives, we can look to God with the expectation and hope that God will respond. And so that's something that we gather from this. The second thing that I gather from this experience is the way that Jesus responds. He doesn't react in that place of fear that the disciples are in. He doesn't feel that terror that they feel. Rather, he speaks to the storm itself. He speaks to it. And it reminds us of the power of God, that when God said, "Let there be light," there was light. And when God said, "Let there be waters and oceans and seas and vegetation and plants and animals and human beings," all of these things came into being through the power of speech. Speak to the storm. This is the example that Jesus gives us. How often do we look at the storms of our life and feel like we're speechless? We don't know what to say. We don't know what we can say. What can we say? Jesus speaks to the storm. He speaks peace into it. He tells it to be still, and it quiets down. And so in this we get a glimpse of the way that God works. God works by being able to speak to things, to speak new realities into being, speaking peace into a place where there is no peace. And so in this story we get a glimpse of who we are as human beings in our own shortness, in our own inabilities. We realize that we can't fix all things, we can't solve all things, but we can turn to God, who is the creator of all things, who has the power over the sea and the storms and the wind and the rain and the earth and all that is in it. And we can speak. Now at this time in our life, there are storm clouds around us. As we see the signs of the earth itself changing, as the weather becomes more erratic and unpredictable, if we don't feel a little bit afraid at the changing climate around us, we should be. There are changes there that we're not prepared for. And like the disciples, we need to cry out to God and say, God, where are you? Wake up. As we look at the violence that is beginning to emerge and arise around us within our country, in the world, if we're not saying now, God, wake up, where are you? When will we? How many times does violence have to erupt? How many times do we have to come into strife with each other, over race, over religion, over politics, over any of these things? When will we cry out as a people and say, God, where are you? Wake up, Jesus, wake up. As I look what happened in Charleston this week, my heart cries out and said, my God, these people were in a Bible study and they were killed. Wake up, Jesus, wake up. And that doesn't mean that God wasn't there. It wasn't that God wasn't awake. I don't know God's side of things. But as a human being, I can say, God, wake up. Do something. Act. And it could be that God's telling me to wake up too. Do something and act. I don't know. But as a prayer, we have every right and every ground to stand on to say, God, where are you? But we're not left in that hopeless place. Jesus gives us the example of what to do with these storms in our life. Jesus gives us the example. Speak to the storm. Don't be afraid of it. Don't let that darkness which gathers around us be the only word that's spoken. Don't let the evil and hatred of this world be the only thing that's being proclaimed. There is light. We are a people of light. We are a people called by God to bring and speak into reality that peace of God which passes all understanding. There is another way. We don't have to give in to fear. We don't have to give in to hatred. We don't have to give in to bigotry. We don't have to give in to any of these forces which seem so much bigger than us. There is another way, and that way is the way that Christ has shown us. And so, we're given the example to speak up as we see hatred in the world, to not let it stand by. I think the most profound example that I witnessed this week, and maybe you did too if you were watching and listening to the news about Emmanuel AME Church, when the killer was brought into the courts and the families were there, some of the families spoke up and they played the voices of them, and they said, "You hurt me. You hurt us in a way that will never be able to be fixed. It's that deep. But I forgive you." I can't begin to understand the depths of the human heart that can reach into that place of pain and find it within themselves to forgive this person who has committed such evil, such violence, such terror. But they did. And they didn't do it because they wanted to make that killer feel better about himself. That's not the reason here. They did it because they wanted to show that evil and hatred are not the solution. They're not the answer. That's not where we're going to find our hope. Our hope is in a God who is bigger than that. Our hope is in the Christ who forgives us, who forgives all of us. That's where our hope is. That's where the light is. And so in the midst of darkness, in the midst of that storm, you can hear those words being spoken, "I forgive you," and showing us that there is a power far greater than even the darkness of this world, than those winds that blow around us, to show us that there's hope, and that hope is found in God. Brothers and sisters, don't be afraid. There are many things in this world to be afraid of, but don't let that fear grab you. Don't let it bind you. Don't let it keep you down. Speak to the storms. Speak to the darkness. Bring light into the world. Let your words, your light, your life shine in the world so that they may know. It's not just for our own sakes. It's not just for the sake of the church. It's the sake of the world because they see these storms gathering around them and they're looking for hope. We can bring that word into life. Brothers and sisters, have courage, have faith, have hope, and be light.